Welcome to the Philadelphia Bar Association's District Attorneys Candidates Forum. I'm Lauren McKenna, Chancellor of the Philadelphia Bar Association. I'd like to thank the candidates and everyone in the audience for joining us for this evening's forum. Connecting Philadelphia's legal community with local elected officials is an important part of our association's mission, and we are proud to host this event. We're also proud to welcome members of the public and to provide a forum where you can hear from the candidates and make an informed decision in the upcoming elections. We have close to 1,000 people registered for today's event, and we welcome you all. The three men who join us tonight will play a key role in shaping the future of criminal justice in Philadelphia. Larry Krasner, the incumbent, will face Carlos Vega in the May Democratic primary, and Charles Peruto Jr. is running as a Republican candidate. I'd like to thank them all for taking the time to participate in this forum and to share their views with our audience. We will also be taking questions from the audience throughout today's forum. If you have a question for the candidates, you can submit the question using the Zoom Q&A feature, and we will try to address as many questions as we can. I'd also like to thank the Philadelphia Bar Association sections and committees that helped to organize this event. The Criminal Justice Section, chaired by Marissa Bluestein and Tom Innes, the City Policy Committee, chaired by Charles Gibbs and David Hyman, the Civil Rights Committee, chaired by Christopher Marcos, and the Government and Public Service Lawyers Committee, chaired by Bradford Ham and Eugene Hsu. I'm now proud to introduce our moderator, Riley Ross, Chair of the Philadelphia Bar Association's Board of Governors and a partner at Mincy, Fitzpatrick's and Ross LLC. Riley will briefly explain the format for today's forum and introduce the candidates for their opening statements. Thank you, Riley, for moderating the forum today. It's our pleasure to have you serve in that role. I'll pass it to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. And as Lauren said, my name is Riley Ross. I'm the chair of the Philadelphia Bar Association Board of Governors and tonight's moderator. Thank you again to the three candidates and to all of you who have registered for tonight's event. We will be asking a series of questions about the candidates' positions on a variety of issues related to the administration of justice in Philadelphia. The questions were not shared with the candidates in advance. Candidates were asked to complete a questionnaire about their policy positions prior to tonight's event, and those responses were used by our committee in drafting tonight's agenda. We are also excited to ask questions that are submitted by the audience during the event. Each question will be posed to all three candidates, who will be given the same set amount of time to answer each question. Candidates, Tracy McCloskey, as you know, our Director of Meetings and Special Events, will flash a hand emoji when you have 30 seconds remaining, and then put the hand back up and leave it there when your time is up. It's my hope that we won't have to mute anyone, but we would like to make sure that we get to all of our questions tonight. It is now my pleasure to introduce the three candidates: incumbent Larry Krasner, Democratic candidate Carlos Vega, and Republican candidate Charles Peruto. We will now ask each candidate to make a 2-minute opening statement going in alphabetical order, starting with DA Krasner, then on to Mr. Peruto, and finally Mr. Vega. DA Krasner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ross, and thank you to everyone who invited me to be here today and participate. Greetings to my opponents, my Democratic opponent and my Republican opponent at this time. So fundamentally, I believe that this race is a question of promises made and promises kept. We said we were going to do certain things back in 2017 when we ran, and we've done them. And it really comes down to this: do you want the future where we are going to continue to keep those kinds of promises, or do you want the past? A past that echoes with names like Rizzo, a past where there was tremendous power in the leadership of the FOP. What am I talking about specifically? Well, we said we were going to do something about mass incarceration. Moving forward, we're cutting it in half. Mass supervision, excessive probation and parole. Moving forward, we're cutting it by 2/3. Juvenile justice, With the exception of about less than half of 1%, every juvenile case is being resolved in juvenile court. Police accountability, our record speaks for itself. Conviction integrity, 18 people have been exonerated on a total of 19 cases thus far. Contrast that with what my opponents have done. Immigrant protection, we promised we would do it, and we have set up a new unit for that specific purpose that has made major steps forward. Worker protection, the first ever unit in the Philadelphia Public Defender's Office. And victims, we have come with a brand new program in this administration known as CARES. I hope to have a chance to talk about it. And we have tightened up issues relating to communications with victims and survivors. I look forward to a chance to exchange ideas with all of you to talk about how our focus on serious crime has led to a nearly 85% conviction rate for shootings and gun homicides. And I thank you for giving me the chance to speak.
Mr. Peruto.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me now? All right. When you bring up names like Frank Rizzo or anyone who is polarizing, it's a good thing to do as a politician. But that's what Larry has become, a politician. Yes, he has made promises and he has kept some of them. And not all of his programs have been bad. However, the result of those promises kept, I believe that the citizens wish he didn't keep his promises, because the result of them is 500 homicides last year. We're on the path for 650 this year. We have juvenile cases, and believe me, I have 40 years experience. If you don't nip criminals in the bud when they're juveniles, you've lost half the battle. When you have a situation like Vincent Spahn Jr., 1 month away from his 18th birthday, has a shootout with rivals on the street, paralyzing a man named Serrano. The district attorney's office agreed to keep him as a juvenile offender, and the public doesn't hear about it because he's a juvenile. So 1 month away from his 18th birthday, he's going to have supervision of the smallest nature, and he's a violent criminal who needs to be incarcerated. Mass incarceration is not a bad thing, because if mass humans are committing crimes that need to be incarcerated, that's what we have to do as a civilized society, because crime needs to be punished. Otherwise, it goes unchecked and we have utter chaos. I have a plan, which the first thing I would do, and I don't believe Larry's ever done this, is sit down with the Board of Judges. Give me 6 judges. Put those 6 judges in a program that hears nothing but gun possession and shootings, with a group of elite district attorneys and former district attorneys, and we can clean this town up and advertise. Walk out of your house with a gun, goodbye. Say goodbye to your family. Make sure you really need it, because you're going away for at least 2 years without question. And if you dare to pull the trigger, you're going to go away for 10 years. Crime must have consequences, and Larry's programs have increased crime rather than decreased. So I wish he broke his promises. I would like to extend a hand. I want to reach out to the police and teach at the police academy to tell them to wise up too, so that they can.
Mr. Peruto, I'm sorry, but that is your time for your opening.
I understand.
Mr. Vega.
Thank you. My name is Carlos Vega, and I'm running for district attorney because I believe we need a more responsible approach to criminal justice reform, as well as prosecuting violent criminals. 4 years ago, we were promised that through justice, we'd have a safer city. As we see now in Philadelphia, Philadelphia is more dangerous now than it's been in the last 3 decades. Mr. Krasner's approach to reform has made us vulnerable and unsafe. I never thought I'd be running for political office. As a young man, I always wanted to be a prosecutor. I grew up in New York at a time when it was ravaged by the heroin epidemic. I suffered the trauma both of violence and systemic injustice. My mother owned a bodega in New York, and we were robbed, we were burglarized. My mother was robbed at gunpoint. Our family was always in danger. But by the same token, I grew up with young people who were ravaged by drugs. They became addicted to drugs and did what they did, which was commit crime, violent crime, to feed that addiction, and also because of lack of opportunity. And that's why I became a prosecutor. That's why I became the voice. I believe people who are victims of violent crime, as well as people who are victims of systemic injustice, want someone like me, a person who looks like them, who speaks their language, who has a sense of compassion because I've walked in their shoes. For 35 years, I've been that advocate, the voice for those mothers who have lost their children to violence. That person who has exercised some compassion, knowing what drove them to do such horrible acts. I've been that person. I believe we need reform. This city deserves it, but it needs safety. The issue is being framed that it's either reform or safety. We need both. We deserve both. I have the commitment and the experience to bring both those things together because our children need to thrive and survive, but also we need reform because Lord knows I've lived it and I've seen people suffer from that injustice. So I'm hoping that you'll give me the time to see my vision, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for those opening statements. We're getting into questions now. We're going to tackle these questions in categories. And the first category is crime. We're going to take the answers in the reverse order that we did opening. So Mr. Vega, we're going to start with you, and then to you, Mr. Peruto, and then to DA Krasner. So the first question is, as of March 21st, there have been 109 homicides in 2021, which is a 27% increase from 2020. Also, there have been 434 shooting victims in the city of Philadelphia as of yesterday. 348 of those were non-fatal and 86 of those were fatal. What would you do, or what are you going to do to address the number of shootings in the city? You have 2 minutes to answer.
What is sad is the level of violence that's being committed in our communities, and I'm sure you're aware that it's being committed in communities of color. As we see of last year with the 499 murders and well over 2,000 shootings, we have to address the safety of our children seriously. Me, myself, living under that specter of violent crime, you live in fear and you don't know what to do. But I see that in terms of the policies of this current administration, I'll use the example of just gun arrests alone. There were, this year alone, 180 gun arrests, yet the office saw fit to withdraw 114 of those cases. Last year, with respect to people who have committed violent robberies at gunpoint, we see that the standard offer, whether it's a first-time offender or someone with a horrible record, the standard offer is 11.5 to 23 months incarceration, immediate parole, followed by probation. As we see is, we need accountability. We need prosecutors who know how to weigh a person who's a first-time offender to someone who is causing and ravaging our community. We use the example of the young man, Milan Lomkar, where we see that time and time again, that individual was committing crime, a robbery, led on the street, a robbery once again, led on the street, then a carjacking at gunpoint, and finally attacking a prison guard. That person was not addressed, and he is just one of many stories of crimes that could have been avoided had the office had seasoned prosecutors to address those issues. So that is one thing that we have to do, but also we have the issue of giving some people opportunities. We need more ability to bring in business into our community, which is not what we're doing. Because as my opponent says, poverty equals bullets. No, crime equals poverty. When you have crime in the community, people leave that area, businesses leave that area. So what it is we have to address the violent crime.
Thank you, Mr. Peruto. Same question.
As I said, you have to have consequences for crime. Many people who are viewing this right now don't understand that if you go in and do your Christmas shoplifting, if you don't steal over $500 worth of merchandise, you're not going to get prosecuted. So do you think that encourages shoplifting or discourages it? These people get shut down, these short store owners get shut down because of a pandemic. They have taxes coming out their ears because the city has to pay for all of these things. And now they're told, we're not going to prosecute who come in and rob you blind. It's not going to work. That is a failed policy. With regard to shootings, you cannot get convictions without elite prosecutors. An elite prosecutor doesn't have these credentials from Stanford and Harvard and Yale for this and that. Elite prosecutor is somebody who's good on his feet, somebody who knows the law, but more importantly, could woo people, could cultivate a relationship with juries. I want to bring back many people who were fired, including Carlos Vega, who can do this so we can get these people incarcerated because they don't believe to walk amongst us. Secondly, when the mayor calls us a sanctuary city, that includes not reporting to ICE illegal immigrants who commit one of the big five. And I don't care about illegal immigration. That's not the DA's job. But when you commit arson, rape, murder, burglary, or robbery, you're going to get reported to ICE. And after you do your time here, you're going to get deported because we don't want you. We want to have a safe city so our businesses can thrive and our home values can rise.
Thank you, DA Krasner.
Thank you. So let's get real about this issue. Here's the reality. Every criminologist in the country agrees the crisis we're having now is as a direct result of the pandemic. There was a look at 34 major cities in the United States to rank them on how bad their increase in gun violence was. Of those 34 cities, the average increase last year was 40%, which is terrible. It's exactly as terrible as Philadelphia. When we look at those 34 cities, they ranked them according to which had the highest increase. Some of these cities had 85%, 100%, 108% increases. Philadelphia did not rank worst at first, did not rank second. It ranked 23 out of 34. You know, we can ignore the reality that we're dealing with a crisis, but think about this for a minute. High school classrooms closed, after school arts programs closed, all organized sports closed, rec centers closed, swimming pools closed, jobs programs closed, summer camp closed. The ordinary jobs kids used to get in a free economy from a one-person contractor operation, sitting in the back, hauling that box of broken plaster, which is what I used to do when I was a teenager. They're not there because people making less than 40 grand have gotten decimated by this thing, while at the same time we have more people on the billionaire list. Get away from prevention, look at enforcement. You all know what's going on here. This is the Bar Association. The courts are closed, okay? Not only are the courts closed for the most part, but we are dealing with a probation and parole department that have been unable to see the people they supervise in their home or in their office for an entire year. We are dealing with a situation where the police cannot do what they normally do, and it is not their fault. I have a very good relationship with the commissioner, but here's the truth. 2 out of 10 shootings were getting solved before the pandemic on average. Now it's 1 out of 10. They're dealing with the pandemic like the rest of us. So if we're going to have some serious discussion about this, we have to be serious about what the truth is. And we got to come out of this investing heavily in everything that prevents crime.
I want to move now to juveniles. Pennsylvania law states that children must be tried as adults under certain circumstances and for certain crimes such as murder. As district attorney, will you limit the prosecution of children as adults? And if so, how? We're going to start with you, Mr. Peruto, then to DA Krasner, and then to Mr. Vega.
Sorry about that. If a juvenile picks up a gun or other weapon and kills another human being, they're going to be tried as an adult. Whether or not we punish them as an adult goes on a case-by-case basis. But I already gave an example in my opening of how the juvenile reform is worse. It is a regressive movement, not a progressive movement. Juveniles between 14 and 17 are the toughest, hardest criminals we have, and people don't understand that. The age has come down because the streets are more open, more violent, and it's because of drugs and the drug trade and the drug profits. We don't understand, and it's easy to figure out. When you have profits being made on these drug corners, and those drug corners can be sold like they're real estate from one businessman to another, you're going to protect those profits, you're going to protect that asset, and you're going to use gun violence, and it's these kids that are out there doing it. We have to get these kids, nip them in the butt if we have to, but we don't let somebody who has a shooting on our streets, paralyzing somebody, get treated as a juvenile. It can't happen. It's got to have consequences. They got to be punished. And if they are punished severely when they're juveniles, we might not have them come back when they're adults.
Thank you. And I neglected to mention that question, you have a minute and a half to answer. So DA Krasner, same question.
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, I think we know where the Republican Party is. But I'm a Democrat, and that's not how I see things at all. And every bit of science out there disagrees with what Mr. Peruto just asserted without any sort of support for it. Look, here's the bottom line. We have a juvenile system that worked well until a lot of people try to chip away at it by forcing it to act like an adult system, by using phrases like super predator and so on. It was the wrong move. If its purpose is rehabilitation, a purpose that works very, very well in other systems for preventing future crime, we should stick with it in general. Does that mean that we can always resolve a juvenile case in juvenile court? No. In fact, you know, my office prosecuted a juvenile for a terrible murder, Marvin Robinson, and he received a 35-year sentence. But that is called individual justice. It is called looking at the cases specifically and looking for individual justice in each case, which is what we are doing. What have we done with juvenile court? We have resolved more cases in juvenile court. It's over 99% at this point. The most serious ones that have to be handled in adult court, we do handle over there. And we have brought juveniles much closer to home, consistent with all current science about what actually works. What does that mean? It means when we came into office, we had over 600 Philadelphia juveniles in placements far away from home, essentially juvenile jails, snake pits. We now have over 100. That's an improvement, and we are proud of that improvement.
Thank you, Mr. Vega.
Thank you. The issue of juveniles and direct file juveniles, I would only use the most extreme forms. That would be murder, rape, or a shooting. There are protocols within the system that we could address that, which is once that person or that juvenile is certified as an adult, there are motions that we had. Those motions would be bring in psychologists, sociologists, and experts to discuss the issue of the crime committed, the child's history, and so on, at which point a judge would decide whether to decertify that child. I would take it one step further, right? Before doing that motion, I would invite these sociologists along with the defense attorney to advocate on behalf of their client. We could do that and decide whether to decertify a juvenile prior to having a court hearing. But if we could not have a meeting of the minds, then there is that protocol of actually going to court and letting that judge, a neutral arbiter, listen to all that evidence concerning with the experts and decide whether that child should be treated definitely as an adult due to the crime and the severity of the crime, or should be decertified and put in the juvenile system to address those needs. But the big issue is this: it has to be a determination. What are the needs of that person and what are the needs of the community, at which point there is a fair decision to be made.
Thank you. I want to go to another question on crime, and I think that this has kind of been at least mentioned or alluded to in the openings and some of the answers so far. So this goes to Mr. Peruto and Mr. Vega directly. Is DA Krasner undercharging? And if so, how do you change this and ensure that your office will not start overcharging? And you each have 2 minutes to answer. Mr. Vega, we'll start with you.
Well, I've seen under this current administration, the DA's office has saw fit to not to charge certain crimes, deciding that it's society who has to address those needs as opposed to using the court system. I'll use the example of people growing up in my neighborhood. There are issues of lack of opportunity, but the fact is they did commit crime. And how do you address that issue and get them the help they need? The way you do that is, since they're not getting help on their own, is to bring them within the system. And I would bring them in on the diversion program. And I'm saying pre-arrest. When a person is arrested, I use the example of a shoplifter or a drug-addicted prostitute. Those people technically are committing a crime. But the thing is, why are they committing that crime? It's an addiction or lack of opportunity that they have to feed their family. So rather than incarcerate them, or as you're saying, overcharge, I would not charge them. I would first put them in a diversion program if they're a first-time offender. If they're not, then they are arrested. But with that diversionary program, number one, someone who has a clean record, I would put in that program to address their needs, be it drug addiction, mental health needs, or lack of employment. If someone is a recidivist that continues doing that, then they go within the system, at which point they are arrested. But then in that probationary period, I give them what's called a program that I want to do, which is learn and earn, which is once that person is in the program, if they get counseling for that addiction, I reduce their probation. If they get parenting classes, once again, I reduce their probation. Finally, when they get a job, vocational training, a GED, the probation would go further down. Finally, when they get a job, a tax-paying job, I would terminate the probation and seal their record, because the person entering the program is at their lowest point, as opposed when you achieve all those challenges, you're a different person, you're a contributing member of society. So I believe that's what we need to do. I impose a learn and earn program for people on probation.
Thank you, Mr. Peruto.
Let me be perfectly clear. My number one priority, if sworn in as district attorney, is gun violence. The other crimes will have to take a back seat because of this epidemic of public problem, public safety. We're being killed out there. We're being slaughtered out there. But to answer the question, not to go off Chase, there is absolutely undercharging in the district attorney's office. I mentioned in my opening that if you steal less than $500 from a retail establishment, you don't even get prosecuted. You can't violate probation because you're not getting convicted. That means you could do it 100 times and nobody knows about you because you're not getting prosecuted. That has to change, because this is a quality of life crime. How about getting your car broken into and your belongings stolen? These cases have to get prosecuted, because the district attorney is the chief law enforcement officer of this city. He's not a public defender. Compassion has to stop at the door of the district attorney's office when it comes to these arrests. Can we treat them individually? Yes. Is somebody starving to death and therefore they had to steal? That's going to be treated differently than somebody who does it every week because he knows he can do it every week and just do their, as I said, Christmas shoplifting. As far as individual justice, which Mr. Krasner mentioned, the reason he doesn't get his $999,000 bail when you use a gun is because he does it across the board. In all cases involving a gun, he asks for $1 million bail. The commissioners are tired of that argument. They look at the DA, say, yeah, you're going to make the same argument, right? And therefore, they don't give them the $999,000 because it's not based on individual circumstances, and the judges are tired of hearing it. We have to do it individually. And last but not least, when he says 2 out of 10 shootings were being solved, it's because the district attorney is not assisting the police in the use of the grand jury. And I don't have to expand on that because we have a pretty intelligent office of what the grand jury could do in solving crime.
Thank you. T.A. Krasner, you've heard some people claim that you're undercharging. There's also been claims from defense attorneys that there still exists, that overcharging is still happening in the DA's office. How do you respond to such allegations, along with any allegations that your progressive policies are responsible for the increase in crime, particularly homicides? And you have 2 minutes to answer.
So let me answer the second part first, which is, okay, so somebody explain this to me. How come there are 22 major cities with higher rates of increase in gun violence where I'm not the DA? How come a lot of those DAs are traditional prosecutors and Republicans? How come those administrations are doing things the old way? This is just politics. I mean, that's really what we're hearing here. Let's talk about a couple of things that are actually accurate, because I'm hearing a litany of inaccuracies. My office does not prosecute sex workers because they're victims, and I'm not going to do that. We do not prosecute the mere possession of marijuana, because it's stupid. We are at the end of prohibition. I'm not prosecuting people for having a beer, especially when even the governor wants to have legalized adult use marijuana. As for the suggestion we're not charging retail theft, that's just false. People are being charged with a summary level offense of retail theft all the time. It's done by the police on their own, and we prosecute those cases. And the way that we prosecute those cases allows us to ask for up to 90 days in jail if we choose to do so. In certain individual cases where the conduct is more serious, we do in fact charge felonies and we charge misdemeanors. We just don't do that stupid thing that they used to do, which was a homeless guy gets arrested for stealing food the 3rd time and he's looking at a felony, which is what the statute allows. In a system where you're always trying to seek the max, that kind of thing is going to run amok. And so we chose to focus on gun violence, which is why we have such a high conviction rate for shootings and for homicide by gun. As for all this talk about bail, once again, these are just sort of wild statements. We do seek very high bail in nearly every single shooting case. We should. It's a shooting case. We do not seek very high bail in a case where you have someone with minimal record who's merely possessing the gun in connection with going to work or out of fear, something like that. We approach this from the perspective of individual justice, and the failure of cash bail is a much bigger topic than has been suggested.
Thank you. And that's a segue to our next section. And I did not let you know about that ahead of time, but we are going to move to cash bail. Now, in the surveys that were mentioned, that were sent out to you, the questionnaires that were sent out to you, and I believe that have been provided to the audience, each of you stated that you would end cash bail if elected or retained your position. What is your alternative to cash bail? And for you specifically, DA Krasner, you're going to start us off here. Ending cash bail was a staple of your campaign when you were elected in 2017. So what is your plan for eliminating cash bail? And we'll start with you, then to Mr. Vega, and then to Mr. Peruto, and you each have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer.
Here are the basics. District attorneys don't set bail. Judges, bail commissioners do. The most a prosecutor can do is take a position. There is a very good system in Washington, D.C., tested for 30 years, and these are the results. About 88% of people get out of jail without having to pay any money. About 12% of people sit in jail pre-trial because they present such a danger that even if they got Harvey Weinstein money, they're not going to get out. We have to divorce money from pretrial detention. Yes, some people should be detained. People who present a true danger to society should be, but that's what no cash bail is. It does not mean that people go home. It has been so effective there. We now see it in New Jersey. We see it in Kentucky. We see it most recently in Illinois. And what we have is just a terrible alternative. We have a system where judges, for whatever reason, seem to assign all these bails in the middle. Broke people who've done nothing very serious sit in jail simply because they cannot pay a minimal bail, while they're working class or affluent folks who are charged with the same thing get out. And then on the other hand, we have some truly dangerous people who can come up with the money. We have tried during the pandemic, because of the crisis, to simulate a no cash bail system. It's not working very well, to tell you the truth, because we're having trouble getting institutions used to doing it an old way to do it a new way. But we have had remarkable success during the entire administration in getting rid of really low bails for broke people that kept them in jail before.
Thank you, Mr. Vega.
Well, the issue is this, there are two, I would eliminate cash bail, but we had to realize why it was wrong. There are people committing nonviolent crimes due to poverty or drug addiction, at which point we're victimizing them twice, because the fact that they're doing these crimes is because they need money. So therefore, those people should not have to pay cash bail, because I call it pre-incarceration. There are other alternatives, which could be a monitoring system. This is the 21st century. You could put them on a monitor, or do a check-in system at certain catchment centers where they would check in every day. With respect to violent crime, and I'm talking about people shooting, robbing, there is bail. But it goes to the point of ridiculousness of saying $1 million bail when there's a crime of violence. We have to address the issue of the danger to the community, but also the person's record. Is it a first offense? Is it a second offense? So rather than asking a blanket statement of $1 million bail, you have to address the issue of what is a crime and who is the individual who committed it, what his ties to community are, and what is his prior record, at which you put experienced prosecutors asking for a proper amount of bail. Because remember, and we forget this within our system, that individual charged with the crime is also presumed innocent. So it's outrageous that you just across the board ask for $1 million and then put it on the judge. Now, this administration, Mr. Krasner said, and he promised he was going to get and eliminate the bail system. He has had several years to do so, and he has not done so. So there is an issue there of a promise made and a promise broken, in that he has had time to do it. He's talking about all these studies. He's laying blame here and there. But the bottom line is this: what were you going to do? What did you promise to do and what you didn't do? So the issue is this: he has let that same archaic system in there and is trying to pass the buck, because in all his answers, he's saying what is wrong, but is not giving a solution.
Thank you, Mr. Vega. Mr. Peruto.
When Mr. Krasner says if someone is drug addicted and they can't afford $1,000 bail and they sit in there, that's unfair. I don't think it's unfair. I think if these people don't want to get help for their drug addiction, then we have to do some tough love. We have to incarcerate them. So it's mandatory detox because presumably you can't get drugs in a jail, and I'll address that later. But you have to keep these people in jail to sober up and to get straight because they're not doing it on their own. People need protection. The district attorney is there to protect us. He's not doing it because these people who in a non-cash bail system, it's a revolving door. Get high, go commit a burglary, get caught, go to jail. But then now you don't have to pay bail. So you get out and you do the same thing the next week and the next week because it's not a cash bail system. It does not work. When Mr. Krasner says, oh, shootings went up 40% all over the country. Yes, he's been campaigning for these very candidates all over the country in Vancouver, British Columbia, San Francisco, Seattle, Greenville, South Carolina. And that's where they're increased because the Mr. Soros and Mr. Krasner and the rest of the regressives have crippled this country, and we need to wake up to it.
Thank you. We're going to move now to systematic racism. Mr. Vega, we're going to start with you and then to Mr. Peruto and then to DA Krasner. And the first question is, does it exist? Does systematic racism exist? And I want you please to answer that question with simply a yes or no. Does it exist? And if so, what role can a district attorney's office play in combating systematic racism? Mr. Vega.
Yes, it does exist. And what role can we do? I will talk about my personal life. In my whole career, I have faced so many obstacles, so many challenges. I mean, I was not supposed to graduate from high school. I shouldn't have gone to college, and I shouldn't be a lawyer. I remember coming to the DA's office and I'm facing systematic racism even there, in that when people failed the bar, everybody thought it was me because I'm the minority, which I did pass the bar. In terms of after 5 years of service in the DA's office, I was the first Latino to enter the homicide unit and be a homicide prosecutor, not only the city, but the entire state. Meanwhile, from the back, you hear always affirmative action. I'm not good enough. I faced the issue of judges saying, let's call an interpreter because I may mispronounce a word. So I've had so many obstacles. So yes, does it exist? Yes. How can we approach it? Is by having people recognize and have people of color within the system. We need to have judges that are people of color. We also need DAs to have people of color. I would approach it by recruiting more people from local schools and people of color. I'll use this example. There are over 300 DAs in the DA's office. Only 45 are African American. Of those individuals making over $80,000. Only 12 are African American. Meanwhile, 112 are the other. In terms of Mr. Krasner's all-star team of new DAs that came in 2019, 64, only 12 were African American. The only way we could stop this is by having our people within the system, making changes, being at the forefront of saying, I'm here, see me, hear me, and then we could bring in within the justice system a level of competence that people of color are competent.
Thank you, Mr. Vega. My apologies. The time limit for this question is 1 minute and 30 seconds. Mr. Peruto.
Yes, there is systematic racism in the justice system, and it starts with the district attorney's office. I'm happy that Mr. Vega just announced the statistics of the salaries in the DA's office. People of color get crushed there. They don't get hired in the first place. He touts himself as a progressive, which by its nature should be looking out for the minority communities. But in reality, you're crushing them because you're not using minority qualified candidates. Are you going to tell me that in the Bar Association and Philadelphia, all the people graduating law school in our area, you can't find qualified minority district attorney candidates? This is a fact. There are so many people that Mr. Krasner has hired from out of town that flunked the bar exam, not once, but twice, and he didn't fire them. He kept them on, and they were white. That's a fact. Nobody's going to refute that. They should have never been hired. That's where the racism is, right there. The courts do a better job of eliminating the racism than Mr. Krasner when he touts himself as a progressive.
Thank you. DA Krasner.
So here's the truth. The truth is that most of the attorneys in the office now have been hired by me. The truth is that the last two classes I hired were 65 and 46 people. And the truth is that the level of diversity in one class was 51%, and the level of diversity in the other class was above 40%. I don't know where people are getting these statistics, but frankly, it is a wild misrepresentation. Mine is the only office to recruit at all 6 historically Black colleges and universities in the United States, plus all top 20 schools and all schools in Philadelphia. The old system was very much East Coast and a few schools that the leadership liked. When I came in, there was only 20% diversity among the lawyers in this very, very diverse city. We have increased it drastically. So I don't know where these factoids are coming from, but I can tell you this: the editor of the Tribune, Philadelphia's storied Black paper, invited me to speak on this topic because arguably we have done more in terms of diversity hiring than any city entity in recent times. Okay. So gentlemen, let's get our facts straight, shall we? Second, this talk about the bar pass rate. Really? Our bar pass rate has been higher than the state average for every class that I have brought in. These are incredibly capable people, and people are entitled to a second chance. I'm not going to be ashamed of that. We have also done a lot with our policies, and with more time, I'll be happy to talk about it. But of course, we have systemic racism in society and in the criminal justice system. We have to measure it and fix it.
Thank you. The ACLU describes the school to prison pipeline as a disturbing national trend wherein children are funneled out of public schools and into the juvenile and criminal justice systems through zero tolerance policies that criminalize minor infractions of school rules, and by having police in schools, which lead to students being criminalized for behavior that should be handled inside the school. Schools and the police are often criticized for supplying this pipeline, but shouldn't the district attorney's office shoulder some of the blame, since the office ultimately decides on whether to charge the student, and if so, the severity of the charges? This is a question that you're gonna have a minute and a half to respond. We're gonna start with Mr. Peruto, then DA Krasner, and then Mr. Vega. Mr. Peruto.
When you have organizations like the ACLU, which I respect, and these other organizations of sociologists and psychologists do these studies, they belong in my favorite filing cabinet. It's right here. It's the trash can, because they're nonsense. They're absolute nonsense. Kids who get in trouble at school for non-criminal behavior, they don't go down to the juvenile hall. They don't go in front of a judge. They don't even get the opportunity to have a district attorney pass on whether to prosecute. You have police in the schools because it's a different world out there right now. You have weapons. You have people fighting with weapons over less serious issues than when I grew up, for instance. Nobody fist fights anymore. It's all weapons now. And when the ACLU comes up with these studies, they are the ones that are flawed. It's only the most serious juvenile cases to get the police involved, and the district attorney can ferret that out. But I don't believe in studies, sociologists, or psychologists.
DA Krasner.
I do. So let's look at a few facts about juvenile justice in Philly now. When I became an attorney back in '87 and spent some time in the juvenile courts, you went into a juvenile courthouse full of judges where there were more than 10,000 criminal cases for juveniles going on. Thanks to some really great work by people like Kevin Bethel, actually a high-ranking police officer at the time, that flow of cases, that pipeline has shrunk a lot. The number of complaints at this point is down to about 2,400. My office is blessed to have Robert Listenby, who was, among many other things, Barack Obama's choice to run juvenile justice for the United States of America in Obama's second term as a first assistant, one of whose primary duties is dealing with juvenile justice. I believe that our record on juvenile justice has shown us going a very different way. We have doubled diversion for appropriate cases. We are working specifically and directly on trying to reduce racial disparities in how the juvenile courts work, and we've been in consultation with juvenile judges about that. We've done a lot, and we're looking forward to doing more.
Thank you, Mr. Vega.
Well, I believe I was blessed in that my mother, working hard, put me and my siblings through Catholic school. The reason she did that at the time in New York, going into the public school in the inner city, not only did you not learn, but you were in danger. I had two friends that were stabbed in junior high. Think as a parent, you send your child to school and you get a call that they're in the hospital and they may die. What I think we have to do is we have to do certain things. One is engage the universities. We see universities like U of Penn, Temple, eating up property and displacing our people. I think they should reinvest in our community. Start channeling funding. They have literally millions and millions of dollars. Start charter schools with appropriate teachers and facilities. Also, as a DA, not that I could do much other than be the bully pulpit, I want to do what I call an adopt a school program. Very briefly, I would make every DA, we have over 300 DAs, adopt a school. That's 300 grammar schools. They would have to go every other week from 8 to 4, meeting those children as they go to school, talking to those parents, and finally do a court program that the children address those issues themselves.
Thank you. Before I move on to the next section, I want to take a question that we have from the audience. We're going to give 1 minute to answer this question. We're going to start with you, DA Krasner. How do you overcome a citizen's fear of retaliation because they reported crimes and or offenders? And how would the other candidates handle this? So we're going to start with you, Mr. Krasner, then to Mr. Vega, and then to Mr. Peruto.
So we spend a ton of money, which flows through to us in the form of grants, government money, for the purpose of trying to protect individuals. There are family relocations, individual relocations that go on. Sadly, we don't have the much greater resources of the federal government, but we are even seeking more resources now. The city has come up with a bit. We've been getting it from other sources. We have people who work full-time on these issues, but it's not perfect. Let's be honest about it. It is a troublesome situation. Contrary to some speculation you may have heard, my office uses grand juries appropriately. We're not allowed to talk about exactly how much, when and where, but we use them appropriately. We use them a lot. That is part of the solution. But obviously, all of these things become much more difficult during a pandemic when we're not doing jury trials, and we're also not permitted at certain times to have a grand jury. I think it's a work in progress. I think if we can partner with a new U.S. attorney, and I'm very hopeful, I think we may be able to work with them to add some additional protections.
Thank you. Mr. Vega.
The issue of victims or witnesses being afraid to come to testify and they're not being protected, we have to realize this. Number one, it is hard for a person who steps forward in their community and identifies someone who lives with them, knows who they are, knows who their family is, to step forward and testify. It's especially harder under this current administration that an individual who's arrested is out in the street within 6 to 8 hours, and they're thinking they're out there, so they're afraid. You have to also work with other agencies. I've seen that other agencies have been alienated. We need the resources of the federal government, also the Attorney General's office. Because I myself, with those relationships with those agencies, I was able to curry favor in that I've given witnesses new identities and being placed out of state. So it's an issue of getting more funding, but from those other agencies, which is the federal government, which has very good funding, and also the Attorney General's office. So one is sending a message that there is accountability to those people who are committing violent crime, but also working with other agencies to be able to protect these individuals and relocate them appropriately.
Thank you. Mr. Peruto.
We need is a partnership with police and the district attorney's office to make sure that these people not only come to court, but feel safe in doing so. We don't have that partnership right now because right now they're at odds. You have to shake hands, start over again, and talk, negotiate with each other. As a criminal defense lawyer, I've had numerous people retain me over the years to get them out of having to testify against another defendant because they're in such fear. They come in here trembling because they don't want to go into court. They have to be made to feel safe. They have to know that they're not going to be shot, that they're not going to be bribed, that they're not going to be ridiculed in the neighborhood. We have to pay attention to them. There has to be a quicker response time. And honestly, there has to be more community involvement with the district attorney handling that case, in calling them back, in making them feel comfortable, in sending a car out to pick them up and bring them to court, and just talking to them. These people are ignored. They get a subpoena in the mail, show up against Joe Blow, courtroom 5F on a certain time. That is not community policing.
Thank you. We're going to shift now to police. Last summer, hundreds of individuals participated in protests and demonstrations in support of racial equality and police reform. During those protests, the city, if not the country, watched as police, on the one hand, the police in Philadelphia, on the one hand, corralled, tear gas, and shot munitions at Black residents in West Philadelphia, and at police brutality protesters on I-676. On the other hand, police did not intervene and were even seen chatting with men in the Fishtown neighborhood armed with bats and harassing protesters. Does the Philadelphia Police Department have a problem with how it relates to and treats Philly's Black and brown communities? If so, what actions would you take as district attorney to change this problem? You have 2 minutes to answer. We're going to start with Mr. Vega, then Mr. Peruto, and then DA Krasner. Mr. Vega.
The issue is this, it's not complicated. We need more officers of color. They have to be conscious of the neighborhoods they are patrolling. Additionally, we need to be part of their training. As we see the police in training from the police academy and their continuing education, train themselves. So it develops an attitude or a thought of it's us against them. What I would propose is the DA's office become part of the training from the beginning to continuing education, bringing in judges, defense attorneys, and more importantly, community leaders. That way they are trained and are no longer see us as enemies, as outsiders, but people saying, we want you in our neighborhoods, we need you in our neighborhoods, but this is what you're doing right, and this is what you're doing wrong. So I think there needs to be the re-education of the police department with the community dealing with it, but also an engagement of bringing more people of color within the police department who comes from those neighborhoods, who are sensitive to the needs of those individuals. So I believe that's very important, the re-education, and also having the police officers step out of their police car. I've seen, when I was young, the police would walk in a beat and knew who we were. Now they are in a bubble in a police car. They don't know their communities. They don't know the store owners. So as a policy, I believe the police need to, even if it's a certain day of the week, step out of that car, knock on a door, walk a beat, and get to know those people. There are novel programs, and I'll use South Philly myself. Captain Dare had baseball cards made of all their officers. Children ran to those police cars saying, can I have the entire deck? That way they could go to the district and get a toy. So suddenly they ran to a police officer to get a card, a good interaction, and then going to a police district, not because somebody was in trouble, but to get a toy. That's how we reoriented everything of bringing back the community with the police working together.
Thank you, Mr. Peruto.
I agree 100% with Carlos. You have to have more police interaction with the community. And there is a strict division with black and white when it comes to white cops, black cops, white people, black people. It is a real problem that has to be changed from the culture right at the police academy. We have no leadership in our police commissioner, zero. I understand that Larry has a good relationship with her, but they were told to stand down on the first day of protests. I have a police officer friend who had urine thrown on him, ordered to stand down. What do you think his attitude is now? Do you think it's going to get better or it's going to get worse? At the same time, you have people that are not part of protesting George Floyd's wrongful death. They're going out burglarizing Modell's, all these businesses. You go walk up and down Walnut Street where you have 1/3 of the businesses closed. Right now, you walk down there, they're closed. There is no tenant in there because their windows were smashed out because on the first day, they were ordered to stand down. That sets the tone for day 2, day 3, day 4 of the protests. And then on those subsequent days when the police used the tear gas, when they weren't necessary, when they should have used them on the first day so that we could set the tone, that's leadership. That's leadership from the mayor's office, from the police commissioner's office. So when it comes to interacting with the community, yes, and we need more police. We don't need more police behind the desk. We need more police on the street. But we can't hire more police because we're spending them on everything else that things that are absolutely needless for cities where we don't have any priority. If you don't have safety, you don't have a city.
Thank you, DA Krasner.
Is it 2 minutes, Mr. Ross?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you. So what I haven't heard is accountability. I haven't heard Mr. Vega, my Democratic opponent, talk about accountability. There's a reason. He is endorsed by the leadership of the Fraternal Order of Police. The major police PAC out there, Protect Our Police PAC, is funded by a notorious racist who gave $25 million to Donald Trump and hates unions. Let's be honest. If my Democratic opponent is elected, who will he serve? We need to support our commissioner in her efforts to improve things, but we need to recognize how bad it really is. We have leadership of the FOP, and that is totally different than the rank and file. But we have leadership of the FOP that twice said Donald Trump and then said Carlos Vega. We have Proud Boys who are drinking inside the officers only area of FOP Hall, a fact the leader of the FOP denied until the Proud Boys got proud and they put it up on social media. We have the leader of the FOP stating that Black Lives Matter is a, quote, pack of rabid animals, unquote. And we have yet to hear the leader of the FOP ever say the word murder when it comes to what happened to George Floyd. Don't hold your breath. He's not going to say it. We need to reject that kind of Rizzo era policing, and that means supporting our commissioner and supporting our active officers when they're trying to do something well. What would I do? We got to ferret out white supremacy within the Philadelphia Police Department. We got to look at the fact that a detective who does recruiting for the police department was at the insurrection. We have to look at the fact that the leader of the Proud Boys, who was just arrested by the feds, was actually the child of 2 police officers. We need to recognize that there's an issue here. We need to lift up the equality-oriented good officers in it, but we need to go after what is wrong. And that means our police misconduct database, which we've used effectively. It means taking seriously training. It means taking seriously pushing back on a contract that seeks to make police completely unaccountable. And then it means doing the one thing that we all know that Mr. Vega won't do, which is hold police accountable.
Thank you. Under Pennsylvania law, the district attorney of the county is in control of police body-worn camera footage when a criminal investigation takes place. Now, there's often a desire for the public to see the footage of critical incidents. Would you commit to releasing the body-worn camera footage within 1 week of a critical incident so the public can form its own opinions? You have 1 minute to answer. We're going to start with Mr. Peruto, then DA Krasner, and then Mr. Vega. Mr. Peruto.
This is 2021. This is not the politics of the past. Police have to wise up. Citizens have to wise up. Body cameras should always be on when there's interaction with a civilian, and there should be transparency, and they should be released because it's a new day. People need to trust their police, and they don't do it now. So we have to go overboard in making them trust the police. And I don't think the police are going to have a problem with it if implemented the correct way. It's nonsense to keep these things secret because our people are rising up and they're aggravated, and we must listen to them.
Thank you. DA Krasner.
I commit that we have to get it out there, but it is more complicated. I was in the negotiations and discussions about the Walter Wallace video, and there were certain things that the family of Walter Wallace did not want out there. They had to deal with their trauma and make decisions around it. So 1 week is not only always the perfect period of time, there may also be, in certain cases, an investigative reason to delay a bit. Yes, it should come out, but that doesn't mean it should come out in a way that is harmful to survivors and victims in those situations, nor should it come out in a way that is harmful to the integrity of an investigation. We have to be a little bit flexible on the timing.
Thank you. Mr. Vega.
Yes, I think it's important that you release that body camera-ish video, but not as an artificial time period of a week or whatever. You have to complete the investigation and decide, because police have to be held accountable. I myself, in the course of my career, have prosecuted police officers. I've prosecuted a police officer for killing 2 people. When other DAs refused to do it because they were afraid of the backlash, I stepped forward and prosecuted that officer, and he was convicted of homicide and did go to prison. As recently as 2017, I prosecuted a homicide detective whose girlfriend committed a murder and he hid evidence. So, and I stepped forward and prosecuted him, and he went to jail. Unlike the two people in this room, I'm the only person who has prosecuted a police officer. I'm the only person who has put a police officer in jail. So I think it's appropriate that the video camera footage really helps in holding people accountable. But I also think it's important that we have a district attorney who is not afraid to hold the police accountable. I am that person who has done it in my career. I have prosecuted police, unlike the current administrator, who has, if you look at his record, he has not put a single police officer in jail. Just very briefly, 30 officers were arrested. Not a single one went to jail. 12 were discharged at a preliminary hearing. 3 were given misdemeanor charges, and 2 were found not guilty. Not a single person.
Thank you. I want to go back to, we're going to start with you, DA Krasner. You were just talking about the police union. We're going to start off with a yes or no, well, it's a yes or no part, but then follow up on that yes or no. Does Philly's police union present a barrier to any of your plans for the district attorney's office? If so, what is that barrier? And if not, how do you respond to criticisms such as the union allows bad officers to remain on the force? We're going to start with you, DA Krasner. You have 1 minute to answer. Then we're going to go to Mr. Vega and then Mr. Peruto.
So the sad part is that they spend essentially all their time trying to stop the kind of reforms we're talking about. By they, I mean the leadership of the FOP. We need to be clear about this. Most people don't know, but the vast majority of members of the FOP are actually retired. They are not current Philadelphia police officers. The leadership has always been male. It has always been white. It has always been Republican. It is no wonder that they endorsed Donald J. Trump twice without even taking a vote of their members, right? So, you know, we have to talk about what they're really up to. They basically spend almost all their time fighting against reform because the truth is they still are in love with the Rizzo era. This city is not, the statue is gone, but they're still in love with that. Our active police officers are in a very, very different position. They have a much more modern attitude. It's a much more diverse group in terms of gender, also in terms of race and other factors. And there is a lot of good we can do with them, but unfortunately, they are not well served by their leadership. They're not well served by the people who have endorsed Carlos Vega, who are supporting his campaign, whose racist funder has filled a PAC for the purpose of supporting that campaign.
Thank you, Mr. Vega.
The issue is simple. We must hold everyone accountable, be it judges, rich people, and police officers. Once again, I'd say with my history, I am the only person in this room who has held the police accountable. I have put officers in jail for homicide. I have put officers in jail for hiding evidence. I'm the one person who has the courage, unlike the other people in my unit who are afraid to step forward. So it's a level of accountability. I would use an issue of statistics, and I would say it starts from the inside. We need to make the police department more inclusive of color, the same way the DA's office was being more inclusive. My statistics of the African Americans in the DA's office are taken from the controller's office. So we begin with the police department that he says is white, but also the whitest district attorney we've had in years from the stats of the controller.
Mr. Peruto.
The Fraternal Order of Police is a union. The electricians have a union, the plumbers have a union, the carpenters have a union. They speak for their membership. That doesn't mean that all of the members agree with the leadership, but they are necessary to equalize. When you have big government on one side with the power of the district attorney's office, the police officers need a union to speak for them, as do the plumbers, etc. So I have no problem with that. And to answer your specific question, which I don't think has been answered by Mr. Krasner, yes, they do have throw a monkey wrench into some of his plans. And that's a good thing, because we can't have government go unchecked. They have to have a voice. They have to have a voice on what it takes to fire them. But are reforms needed? Yes, of course the reforms needed. When a police officer commits criminal acts and gets away with it for one reason or another, then you have to be able to remove them in an easier fashion. I agree with that reform. It's just got to be. But sometimes we can negotiate their dismissal instead of their prosecution. which I think might keep everyone happy to get them off the force, not prosecuted, and go get another job. There is a ground in the middle that could be reached, but they don't talk to each other.
Thank you, Mr. Peruto. We're going to move now to prison population. And instead of going with one of my questions, we're going to go with a question from the audience. And I'm going to read it as it's presented. My question is directed to Mr. Krasner, but anyone else can surely weigh in. Mr. Krasner seems very proud of the lower incarceration rates he's worked to obtain. In fact, it appears prison headcount has been reduced by half over the last 4 years. Does he see any correlation between fewer people in prison and the huge spike in homicides? How does opening the jails make Philadelphia safer? Okay, so we're going to go in the same order we just had, and we give you a minute and a half to answer, starting with DA Krasner, then Mr. Vega, and then Mr. Peruto. So for Mr. Vega and Mr. Peruto, you can simply answer if you see a correlation in the lowered people in prison and the spike in homicides, and does opening the jails make Philadelphia any safer? We're going to start with you, DA Krasner.
So thank you for the question. The numbers are off. We came in with 6,500 people. The numbers now are more or less around 4,500 people, having reached a low at the beginning of the pandemic because of the severe fear of a super spreader. Thank goodness we didn't have a giant population, because it could have been a real problem. There has been not my opinion, but a scientific study that was done by 2 professors about our first bail policy, in which we took 25 nonviolent, relatively low-level charges, and we had a policy that we generally asked for no bail. It resulted in a lot of people getting out of custody, and the academics are very clear. On the science, it did not cause an increase in crime. On the science, it did not cause an increase in people failing to appear in court. If someone has another study, please show it to me. But that's not what I usually expect in these conversations. What I expect in these conversations is, frankly, what has sadly been going on with criminal justice too long, which is people simply spout things. They spout facts that are incorrect. They misquote data. They just say whatever they think. They say a lot of truisms that we've been used to for a very long time. No, I do not think that what we have been doing with bail explains the spike in homicides and gun crimes at all. And I think it should be pretty clear that when you have 22 major cities that are experiencing worse than us, and they have not done these same things in many, many cases, I think it should be pretty clear that we have to be a whole lot more scientific about it. Somebody's got to come with some actual evidence if we're going to even take a question like that, in a much more carefully considered way.
Thank you, Mr. Vega.
Well, I believe, and we make the mistake of painting everything with the same brush, which is mass incarceration. Absolutely, the people who are not committing violent crimes do not need to be incarcerated unless they're recidivists that cause a quality of life problem. They shouldn't be in prison. But there's those people who are violent that need to be incarcerated to protect our community. And this is the problem what Mr. Krasner has had. He can't tell the difference. My statistics are from his own data dashboard. So see, with the increase in crime, we'll see the example of this year alone. When you have 180 gun arrests, illegal guns, and you let out 114 of them without any prosecution, it causes an issue that those individuals commit crime. From his own data dashboard, when you have that every person who's committing a gunpoint robbery, whether a first offender or with a record, and they are just receiving the same sentence of 11.5 to 23 months, immediate parole and probation, it causes an issue. You're painting everyone with the same brush. And these stats are not taken out of the air, but from his own statistics. So we see that this increase in crime is caused with the lack of, I guess, experience, or deciding not to prosecute certain crimes, or not seeing that illegal guns are a problem in our community, because the community that is suffering the most is community of colors that are being shot and killed in record numbers. As last year and is coming to this year, every day a person of color is getting a knock on the door saying your child has been killed or your child has been shot. And you have to know how to do these things of addressing violent crime and those individuals in prison.
Thank you, Mr. Peruto.
When a 6-year-old goes to his mother's viewing, is he going to look at her and say, boy, there's a scientific study that says you shouldn't be there? Again, with the scientific studies, let me tell you, it's not just crimes committed with guns. You have domestic violence. which is really, really underreported, which is under prosecuted, when you have a woman being beaten or threatened to be beaten or lives in fear of her husband, and it's not dealt with by the district attorney's office in the proper way because she has nowhere else to turn. That is a failure on the part of that DA. I don't care what the studies say. You have a situation in Philadelphia right now where there's so many resources used on items such as studies that are not going to help the public do a damn thing. We have to address all these things. And if they need incarceration pre-trial, then they got to be incarcerated. Because when you have a husband arrested for aggravated assault and he makes bail, then we have a real problem when they get out. And the district attorney's office can't just blame the bail commissioner and say, we asked for $500,000 bail and the commissioner gave 5,000. What about appealing it and appealing it and appealing it and getting a stay? You got to work. And there's things that can be done to keep these people behind bar. That guy walking his dog in a Brewery Town, he should be alive today, but for the failures of that office, and we all know it.
We're going to stick with prison population. Many people are held in Philadelphia County custody, not because of a new arrest or charge, but because of technical violations of conditions of probation, such as the failure to report to their probation officer. What is your position on detainers being lodged on probationers solely due to a technical violation of probation or parole? You'll have 1.5 minutes to answer. We're going to start with you, Mr. Peruto, then to DA Krasner, and then to Mr. Vega.
Well, if there was ever a situation where you have to look at these things on an individual basis, it's probation detainers. You have some good judges, such as Palumbo and other judges that review these probation detainers, and they're mindful of the fact that, hey, do we really want to hold this guy because he failed to report to his probation officer when he was trying to work, when he was interviewing for a job? And the judge just got done a conversation with him over video from jail that he promises that he will keep in touch with his probation officer. You got to give these people a chance, because that's where the system fails. To just, all right, you didn't report, probation officer wants you in jail, you got to go to jail. That's where you need an individual case-by-case basis. That's where you need some smart, sharp DAs to look at them individually and say, this one should get detained, that one shouldn't get detained. And this way they get credibility with the judge to know a bad case from a good case.
Thank you. DA Krasner.
So this is a small part of a much bigger problem. I mean, I think the Meek Mill case, which is now over, so we can talk about it, in some ways made this a famous question. You have someone who is being supervised for almost 10 years. He commits no crime, but he's popping a wheelie in New York. He's doing things that the judge disapproves of. And eventually she gives him a longer sentence than he had in the first place, almost 10 years after when he had the sentence. She gives him 2 years in jail, right? We need to face the bigger issue. The bigger issue here is that New York City, when I came into office, had 12,000 people on probation and parole, all 5 boroughs. Philly has 40,000 when I came in. It is the most over-supervised city of all the big cities, and the 3rd most over-supervised state of all the states in the United States. And this is just one symptom of it. When you keep people on probation and parole forever, then little things come up. What little things? Okay, somebody's got a little bit of marijuana in his system 5 years into his supervision, didn't need to be supervised more than 3, but a judge who drinks brown liquor every night thinks marijuana is the same thing as heroin and puts him back in jail for a year. It's absurd. In general, no, we should not be holding anybody on a detainer for a technical violation. A direct violation is very different. That is the commission of a new crime. But a technical violation in general, no. Are there probably a few exceptions? Yes. Should we look at them individually? Yes. But this is exactly the problem that we have. If every little stumble is viewed as a reason to put somebody back in jail, you take them away from their job, from providing for their family, from being taxpayers, from doing what we want them to do.
Thank you, Mr. Vega.
I think the issue of detainers is we meet it head on. Those people who commit a non-violent offense, a technical violation, a detainer should not be issued. A detainer should be issued when they commit a crime of violence, be it rape, assault, or having a gun. What I see lacking with the probation department is not lacking the probation department, but with the district attorney's office. When I was a district attorney, I met the probation officer after that violation was put in court. We need to institute a program with the DA's office communicating with the probation department, discussing the issues that the probationer is facing. There are issues, let's say, when a person is living in their mother's house and she has a boyfriend and she doesn't like him. There'll be some issue coming up, which the probation department can say, okay, we need to find this person other housing to not violate them. So I don't believe so. Also, what I believe is that learn and earn program. When someone's on probation, as I say, we're over supervising people with the learn and earn program. When someone's on probation, if they get clean and sober, parenting classes, and vocational training in a job, each step of the way, that probation is reduced. So the probationer is working to walk off that probation, so they're finally off that probation and we could seal that record. So it's their choice to terminate that probation or determine the length of their probation by their acts, which is the roadmap I'm giving them to use.
Thank you. We're going to shift gears now and talk about victims. And we're going to start with a question that came in from the audience. This question, you'll get 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer. We're going to start with you, Mr. Vega, and then to Mr. Peruto, and then to DA Krasner. And the question that comes in from the audience is, what do you think the role of the victim is in the prosecution and sentence of a case? Mr. Vega.
Well, being in the homicide unit for 30 years, I've heard the cry of many mothers saying they've killed my child. The reason I'm running for office over the past 2 years, so many mothers have come to me saying they've forgotten me. They're not talking to me. I think when you lose a child or you're a victim of a crime, you should, and the DA's office should be transparent. They should communicate with you. They should tell you every step of the way. Also, when you have a victim of crime, I know they're hurt, they're angry, but you have to realize the office must engage them and explain to them, these are the facts, this is the law, and this is why we're negotiating this sentence. I see time and time again now that the office does not communicate with them. People are finding out their hearings or sentences or people being let out through the newspaper. I don't understand why the office no longer communicates with victims and why they don't engage them. Where in 1982, I was able to engage witnesses and find them and talk to those families. We're in the 21st century where we all have a computer, a cell phone in our pocket that we can find people. So absolutely, the office must be transparent and make those victims part of the process. That way they know that the DA's office cares, feels their pain, and is trying to make them whole as best they can.
Thank you, Mr. Peruto.
When you're the district attorney of Philadelphia or any other city, you are the attorney for the victim. You're the attorney for the Commonwealth. That's your client. When we hear Mr. Krasner saying people shouldn't be incarcerated for this or you shouldn't be incarcerated for, what we really have to pay attention to is the victim. The victim is the star witness in your case, Commonwealth versus Joe Blow. And they need to be heard. They have to be communicated with, as Mr. Vega just said. They got to be kept in touch with. I'm a private lawyer. I don't just do defense. So when victims or somebody subpoenaed by the DA calls me and they go, what's this? This guy burglarized my house a year ago. I get this thing in the mail to come to court. Do I really have to go? And they call you for advice and guidance. I said, didn't the DA call you? Didn't anybody call you to tell you what it's needed or what you're needed for or what this is all about? No, I just got this thing in the mail. Did you get it certified mail? No, just regular mail. A year later, when they may have moved, is that really the effort we're putting in to helping victims? These things need to be explained. You're the attorney for the victim. Your assistants work for you. Pay attention to that victim. See what they need. Get them counseling. Get them protection. Represent them.
DA Krasner.
Yes, thank you. So the attorney for the Commonwealth has a client. It is the Commonwealth, and that law is crystal clear. And the confusion that you're hearing, frankly, is fundamental to the way that, in my view, victims and survivors have been used far too long for political uses, for political purposes by the prosecutor's office. A victim, a survivor, has a voice, and that voice should be heard. It should be heard as long as it needs to be heard, and it should be considered. But a victim or a survivor does not have a veto. In the same way, the law would preclude them from judging a case of their own victimization or being on a jury in a case involving their own victimization. We have to look as prosecutors, consistent with our oath, to what is in the interest of the entire Commonwealth. What is in the interest of justice, not only for the people in the courtroom, but for people who are outside the courtroom. And so that is really the fundamental point. My office has brought about a CARES program, which frankly is an amazing program, never existed before. We have tightened up communications in the office by requiring new levels of accountability as to every single contact that is attempted and that is made with victims and survivors. We have brought in new databases, and here I agree with Mr. Vega. We brought in new databases at the suggestion of the statewide Office of Victim Assistance so that we are able to reach people with greater success. We use every electronic means, every paper means. We use detectives to get in there. And we've been recently refunded to the tune of almost $2 million for 3 more years of the CARES program. We take this all very seriously. It is a very, very difficult experience for a lot of people who've been victims of serious crime. I was a victim of a violent crime myself. Nothing is, I was cut in the face. Nothing as serious as what happens to victims of homicides. But I do know a little bit about what they're going through, and I spend a lot of time with them, and I'm very proud of my office and its efforts to do better by victims every day.
Thank you, DA Krasner. What is your position? This is for all the candidates. What is your position on Marsy's Law, which is touted as a victim's Bill of Rights? What is your position on Marsy's Law and the criticism by civil rights groups that it infringes on the accused's right of due process? We're going to start with Mr. Peruto, then to DA Krasner, and then Mr. Vega, and you each have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer.
We all have rights. Everybody wants more rights. Everybody who believes that they need to be heard wants to be heard more. Everybody who feels that they haven't been heard enough feels left out. The problem is the Bill of Rights, the Constitution protects the defendant. His lawyer stands between the Commonwealth, the state, the government, and the judge and the jail. The lawyer is up to advocating for him. The district attorney advocates for their rights. Most of the things on the Bill of Rights as proposed are needed. These people feel left out. All we were really talking about is fairness to the defendants, mass incarceration, fairness in bail. We are representatives of the people, of the Commonwealth, of the victims, and they're the ones that need it to perform and write up this Victims' Bill of Rights because they felt left out. If they didn't feel left out, they wouldn't have written it.
Thank you, DA Krasner.
Thank you for the question. The devil's really in the details here. People talk about Marsy's Law as if it's a universal law. It is different in basically every state that has considered it. Many, many states have rejected it. A lot of prosecutors have rejected it as it has been written in their jurisdiction because in some versions, it calls for victims and survivors having input as if they are untrained lawyers into the process itself. I have had conversations even with some very traditional prosecutors and very traditional judges who have serious issues with it when it's written a certain kind of way. It has been rejected, as I said, in many jurisdictions because of some of those details. But I will say this, I think that depending on how it is written, depending on the specifics, it can be something that should be supported. And depending on how the specifics are, it is something that should be opposed. The specifics matter. And honestly, there's a lot more smoke than light, a lot of times coming from groups on both sides about exactly what is being proposed in a particular state.
Thank you, Mr. Vega.
If I may, we see that in the court system is an adversarial system. When a person's arrested, they have their attorney, right to remain silent, right to a jury. Now, in terms of the Marsy's Law, we see that the victims are just asking to be heard and to be notified. I'll use the example of the business owner, the Asian business owner who was shot with an AK-47. A plea was done without notifying the victim. He had no voice to at the sentencing, although he cannot control the sentence, saying, this is the harm I suffered. I can no longer, feed my family. An example with a young lady called me. She was raped. She saw the rapist walking down the street with no accountability. Nobody notified her. So I think what Marsy's Law says is that victims need to be notified. And if the DA's office falls short of making them part of the process, not that they can make a ruling, but but part of the process of knowing what's happening and at least voicing their concern of their safety or not, there should be accountability. As we see now, when the DA's office doesn't do their job, there's no punishment. Marcy's law is giving teeth that when you violate that law, when you don't keep the family notified, there's a sanction, maybe suspension, maybe a reprimand. That's what you need. And I'd ask Mr. Krasner, if you're talking about the pros and cons, when has your legislative unit written a portion of Marcy's law that is proper? There's a legislative unit in the DA's office. Write it, bring it to Harrisburg, advocate for it. I would.
Thank you. And of course, we are doing this in a format, so we're not going to. I'm not allowing for time to address specific questions, but we are going to shift gears here, and we're going to shift to immigration. If elected, what will be your policy regarding sharing information with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE? You have 1 minute to answer, and we're going to start with DA Krasner, and then Mr. Vega and Mr. Peruto.
So my policy is known. Mayor Kenny and I worked together to break a contract that existed for 10 years, whereby the city and law enforcement worked pretty hard to expedite deportations and terrible immigration consequences. We are coming off of a criminal and traitorous president who is a complete racist and was hell-bent on throwing out as many immigrants as he possibly could because of his own racist ideology. That was nothing that I was going to go along with, and I'm very proud to say we didn't, but we have done more than that. We also initiated for the first time in the history of the office an immigration unit that protects victims who are undocumented. While Trump was trying to deport them, we did that, protects witnesses, and then also looks for fairness and equity in the handling of criminal cases where the case itself is not so serious, but the immigration consequences could be enormous. I'm very proud of the work we have done there, something that we were able to take from our friends in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office who tried the same idea earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Vega.
In my 35 years of service, I've had much contact with my Latin brothers because I speak Spanish in terms of that when they were undocumented. They are victimized twice in that they had to live in the shadows. So never once was any federal agency notified that this person was undocumented. But you also have to take into account that there are other undocumented aliens who are preying in that neighborhood because they're afraid to go to the police. So that is the issue that, number one, I would never notify ICE because they have no access to our records. But with respect to a defendant, if they are in the system, the federal government is going to find out about it. What I take issue with, which the Black community has come forward, is this. Why is my child, who's Black and American, get discharged, yet an undocumented alien, they reduce that charge? I'll use the example of an Asian. He strangled his girlfriend, assault by strangulation, she lived, yet the DA's office reduced that charge from assault to disorderly conduct, unleashing him on some unsuspecting female. So that is something we had to address.
Thank you, Mr. Peruto.
Larry's answer was flawed for two reasons. One, you bring up Donald Trump because we're in a city where it's 8-1 Democrats to Republicans, and all you have to do if you want to win an election in this town is mention Donald Trump. Donald Trump's not part of this. He's in the past, but it's good for him to raise that because that's a smart political move. Let's talk about the victims and deportation. I don't care about deportation unless an illegal alien is committing one of the big five, as I said, rape, robbery, murder, burglary, or arson. Then I want them out of this country as fast as I can after they pay their debt to our society for coming here and preying on us. But I'm, as district attorney, I'm not worried about their rights. I'm not worried about what happens in them getting deported or going to a place that's worse than here. I'm worried about the harm they inflicted on our citizens. That's the job of the district attorney, the advocate for the victim.
Thank you. I want to ask you all, just say we're going to go in the same order that we just went in, and this is just a yes or no on immigration, and it's kind of based on some of your answers there. Would you be in favor of, or would you commit to a firm moratorium against sharing information regarding immigration status and other personal information in order to preserve Philadelphia's status as a sanctuary city? Yes or no, DA Krasner?
Yes.
Mr. Vega,
Yeah.
Mr. Peruto.
I'm not sure about the question, but I would share information because 911 has taught us we must share with every agency all information as possible.
Okay. The next question, we're going to stay in the framework of working with other federal jurisdictions. And this question came in, and this is another question we're taking from the audience. This question actually came from a former United States attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. And I'm going to read the question verbatim. Combating violent crime requires joint efforts between federal and local law enforcement. Between 2013 and 2016, joint efforts led to homicide numbers dropping under 300 per year. Since 2017, they have trended upward, pandemic notwithstanding. How do you plan to work collaboratively with feds to battle violent crime to make our city safer? We're going to start with Mr. Vega, then Mr. Peruto, and then DA Krasner, and you have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer.
What we have to do is put our egos aside and work with every agency, not insult one agency or another for a soundbite. I'll use the example of Josh Shapiro when there were comments made from the DA's office about harboring Nazis or whatever. I think we need to work together. I think we need the help of the federal government, ATF, DEA, and their resources, as well as the Attorney General's office and their intelligence and law enforcement. We cannot solve this problem alone. We don't alienate people, we need allies. And I need all law enforcement agencies working together, as well as the community, because the community solves these crimes for us, but we need the data, the manpower, and the resources of all those agencies working together. So absolutely, that makes a difference. I believe under this current administration, he has broken ties with all of it because he leads with a standalone, it's my way or the highway. We need to work together, which means be humble, be quiet, and listen to what people are saying and work together.
Thank you. Mr. Peruto.
The first thing I would do, because I'm not a genius and I don't know everything there is to know about everything, is to invite the U.S. attorney, the local assistant, the local U.S. attorney, the head of FBI, DEA, Secret Service, to my house and have my wife cook them dinner. Break bread with them, share experiences with them, and listen and let them know in the most humble way possible, I need you, help me. What can you do? I'll tell you what I could do. Break up the duties and work together. I think that other than give each other the finger, the last 4 years have been the opposite of what I just said.
Thank you. DA Krasner.
So pretty quickly after coming out of law school, I was actually a federal public defender, did nothing but federal cases. And then for all the years after, I spent a lot of time in federal court. I know that Mr. Peruto did as well. And here's the truth. I have very long-standing relationships and always have had them with some of these really excellent professionals who work in the U.S. Attorney's office. Such good relationships that under the prior U.S. Attorney, I sent 35 gun cases down to them for their consideration to prosecute. Unfortunately, the leadership was not in the same place. He was busily trying to build his political resume to run for Senate, which is what that was all about. He sent back 30 of the 35 cases we sent down there. It will be no issue for us to work successfully with a Biden-appointed U.S. attorney in Philadelphia. I can tell you, we work with them all the time. We've had some tremendous success with the FBI in terms of protecting our election, dealing with some issues that involve Proud Boys, things of that sort. That work is ongoing. And we actually have a really fascinating announcement about a huge case that we've been working on them together with for a number of years. Stay tuned for that. So I don't see a problem. And I'm also very, very excited to see who gets picked. There's one in particular I would love to see in that position, but I would be happy to work with any of the three who seem to have been put forward as the likely candidates.
Thank you. We're going to next move to, and I noticed that we're coming into the home stretch here. We're going to next move to the Conviction Integrity Unit. I'm going to ask Mr. Peruto and Mr. Vega questions that actually were on the questionnaire, but I think that the I want to hear your answers here in this context. Do you believe that the present administration's conviction integrity unit has been too aggressive? Whether you believe it too aggressive or not, what will you do to alter the CIU? We're going to start with you, Mr. Peruto, and you have a minute and a half to answer, and then we'll go to Mr. Vega.
Oh, I have a lot to say about this. As a defense attorney, but be a public defender or a private lawyer, you take these cases, you look for any problems with them, and you bring them to a district attorney, any DA in the past, to look at the facts and circumstances of how they got convicted and ask them to address it. In the cases that I read about, to say someone was wrongfully convicted is to say that they are innocent. There's a huge difference between not guilty and innocent. If a defense lawyer couldn't prevent it, a jury couldn't prevent it, an appeals court couldn't prevent it, all these people say guilty. Nobody stood in the face and said, no, not guilty. I find it hard to believe that all of these cases exist because, believe it or not, the system works. There's many more people who go free that did it. They can get convicted who didn't do it. And it's very rare. However, there could be nothing more horrible than going to jail for something somebody didn't do. So I think it's admirable that they've looked at these cases and given them a real strong look for exoneration. But at the same time, you don't need to be giving $25 million, $10 million for one person when there might be 100 people who had something go wrong with their case. Can you give them $500,000 to get their life started again? Once again, the taxpayers are just getting beaten over the head with these things. And I'm telling you now, I don't believe that there's that many people that were absolutely innocent with all of the safeguards that they went through in prior administrations. I don't believe it.
Thank you. Mr. Vega.
In the course of my career and also growing up, there are issues of whether a person is guilty or not, and whether they have the funds to prove their innocence. Although they don't have to prove it, but it does happen. What I believe the integrity unit needs, and it needs to be expanded, because I myself, before that unit was created, I would work on cases to exonerate people myself. And that was having the support and the trust of the defense bar. I remember as recently as 2017 with Mr. Cortez, his attorney says, Carlos, look at this case because I don't think my guy did it. I investigated that case and exonerated him. He was serving life. But doing that investigation, if you have a seasoned prosecutor, a seasoned investigator, you will find out who the real culprit is. In that case, not only did I exonerate that young man, but I did find the real killer. He pled guilty. He was arrested for murder and pled guilty. So I believe the integrity unit in this particular administration, what we have is people straight out of law school because he falls short of the mark. It's fine to let someone out that is innocent, absolutely, but there's not that further investigation to make that victim's family whole. You need seasoned prosecutors with at least 6 to 7 years experience who are both defense attorneys or prosecutors to continue investigating that case to find out the true perpetrator. Because although he's innocent, there's someone who did kill that child, and we need to find that person because we owe it to that family. So it's a question of having seasoned prosecutors there as opposed to what's occurring now. People straight out of law school, with the exception of 2 people, one having done a homicide and one never having done a homicide. We need experience.
Thank you. DA Krasner, I'm going to ask you a question about the conviction integrity unit, and I think it gets to what was asked of Mr. Peruto, Mr. Vega, and it also gives you a chance, it gets to that. But recently, Judge Stefano Nastasi upbraided the CIU for, as she said, failing to fully investigate a case for which your office requested the reversal of a conviction. How do you respond to judges who don't feel your office has done a thorough enough investigation to overturn a jury's verdict?
Well, let me just correct that quickly. She approved what we did in that case. That's the bottom line. And every single one of our 19 exonerations of 18 defendants has been approved by the judiciary after very careful and searching review. Mr. Vega, let's talk about Tony Wright. That might be a familiar name to you because Tony Wright spent 25 years in jail for a terrible rape murder he did not commit. And after fighting for years to get DNA tested from the victim, it was tested. The DNA came back that it was not Tony Wright. And it even more so, it came back to an identified individual in the DNA database who lived a mile from that poor woman who was raped and killed. And what did you do? you and one other attorney retried Tony Wright after you had that information. The jury was out less than an hour, and they were rightly upset that the retrial had even occurred. You put on the officers who had taken a coerced confession from Mr. Wright. That was you, sir. I understand that words are cheap in an election cycle, but we got to talk about the receipts. We got to talk about what you have actually done when you had the power to do something. And what you did to Tony Wright was wrong.
We're going to move now to the to another question from the audience. And this is for all three. You're going to have 1 minute to answer. We're going to start with DA Krasner, then Mr. Vega, then Mr. Peruto. There is a tremendous case backlog in Philadelphia due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As DA, how would you resolve that backlog? And for DA Krasner, obviously, it's how are you resolving that backlog? And you have 1 minute to answer.
Great question. We're going to come out of the pandemic potentially with twice as many cases in the system as when we started. And we can't throw too much blame around. Let's be honest about this. It has been very tough on the courts, very tough on lawyers on both sides, very tough on police, probation, everybody else. But how are we going to do it? We are doing it as much as we possibly can on an ongoing basis. And actually, we have been able to move along shooting cases and rape cases as prioritized cases to the point where we're getting through almost as many of them as before. But to talk more generally about the situation, we are disposing of as much as we can right now. We're going to deal with a backlog for a while. What we have to do is make sure we're adequately staffed, adequately budgeted, and diligently chip away at it. I have no doubt that once the courts are open, and as they're opening progressively, we are going to be able to get judges who are willing to work long hours so that we can move these cases out. And that's exactly what we intend to do.
Thank you, Mr. Vega.
Well, being a prosecutor 35 years, you have to be creative in getting rid of that backlog as opposed to dropping the charges like the 114 gun cases he just dropped the charges on. I would propose having 3 shifts, a morning shift from 8 to 12, where you keep the courtroom socially distanced and you dispose of those cases. Then from 12 to 5, dispose of those cases, and then from 6 to midnight, have police cases where they confiscate drugs or guns, which is a police case only. That way you have the court system humming in terms of you getting rid of that backlog, as opposed to trying to get rid of the backlog, just letting people who committed violent crime or having illegal guns go under the radar for the sake of, oh, there's just a backlog, because all those victims need some measure of justice. So a 3-shift system would reduce the backlog within 6 months. So that's what I would do.
Thank you, Mr. Peruto.
Well, my wife's going to have to go to Costco and buy more food so she can cook for the Board of Judges this time, because I need to sit down with the Board of Judges and work out a plan that they will agree to, and not go to the press and announce we got to do this, but the judges don't want to work, etc. Sit down, break bread with them, get their ideas, and come up with a solution. But we're going to have to put money aside. And when I say that, civil cases are not going to be a priority after this pandemic. We got to move civil judges to the criminal division, family court with emergency PFAs, with people getting beaten all. We can't take them from there. So I would say if we get more judges into the criminal division, just until the backlog is fixed, and maybe, just like Carlos just said, maybe working shifts. I would prefer 2 6-hour shifts, because 6-hour shift is more realistic than an 8-hour, and get these cases cleared up. But that doesn't mean dropping cases or giving probation where jail is necessary just for the sake of getting them cleaned up. Everybody's going to have to work harder, because let's face it, we just had a long vacation.
Thank you. This question is just for Mr. Vega first, and then Mr. Peruto. You'll have 1 minute to answer. And this is another question from the audience. The DA's office has a huge staff, both prosecutors and support staff. Please tell us about your administrative experience. Mr. Vega.
My administrative experience begins with my childhood. I helped my mother run a bodega. After that, I helped her run a newsstand. Also, while in college, working my night job, because I worked at the newsstand by day, the went to college, and then worked in a shoe store. I had the keys and worked 8 different shoe stores. Finally, with respect to the DA's office, I led investigations, mentored younger DAs, and chiefs would ask me my advice on what to do in certain units. So also, I worked 15 years as a single dad, so I could put my children to Catholic school. There I ran next day airs in every other area of UPS. All those brown cars you see, I ran those for this city. So talked about experience. And finally, as the DA, you don't run it by yourself, but you bring in the best and brightest minds, people with experience to run, the best people in appeals, trial users, and the like. So with respect to my experience, I have more than enough experience both doing blue collar work, white collar work, and dealing with all kinds of people.
Thank you, Mr. Peruto.
Well, not only am I the leader of my own law firm, where I have associates and paralegals and secretaries, and you got to keep everybody happy. I also had a building business where you have foremen and levels of a hierarchy where you have to deal with them and keep them happy. I honestly think that I'm excited about that being district attorney, because I want to go in there and really give them my ideas, sometimes my war stories and my experiences, and actually go into the courtroom and try cases by example, because there's nothing I like better than being in a courtroom and trying cases. I want to show them, I want to bring the exuberance back. I want to bring the elite nature of the Philadelphia District Attorney's office back, because it was a prized job. It was elite. It was class. When you came out of the district attorney's office, you could go anywhere because it was a badge of honor. And I want to restore that. And the way you restore that is having walked the walk, talked the talk, and lead by example.
Thank you. It is 6:20, gentlemen, and we are at our final question. For this question, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to answer. I would like for you to answer the question specifically, but if you have some time left over, you want to round that into a closing statement, that's fine too, but this is your final question. Tell us, what will you do if elected in your first 90 days in office? We're going to start with Mr. Peruto, then Mr. Vega, and then DA Krasner. You have 2 minutes. Mr. Peruto.
I address this in my position papers, which I publish. I want everybody to know where I stand on each issue so that they know who they're voting for. And many people will reject those policies, but they're out there. The first thing I want to do, well before being sworn in, is meet with the Board of Judges, as I've alluded to twice. Get them on board. Give me my 6 judges to man these gun courts. Make sure that we have the most elite, experienced prosecutors who are foaming at the mouth to be real DAs again. Bring back some DAs that were fired to be real DAs again. These people don't do it for the money. They make $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. They don't do it for the money. They do it for the love. They do it for the love of our city, which is why I'm running for district attorney. And let me tell you something. There is a lot you can accomplish when you're not motivated by money or by fame. You're doing it for the love of this city, and you could honestly make a huge difference. The other thing is grand juries. Utilize the power of the grand jury, which is an immense power that most people don't understand. Get victims in there. Get organizations solved. Find out who's running these drug corners and target them, and make sure their sentence is long enough to where the next person in line says, ooh, I don't know, $2 grand a week is worth that. You got to make these people wise up. With regard to guns, advertise, use some of the budget to make sure that we advertise, get free publicity to show what the penalties will be for carrying a gun without a license. Don't leave your house with a gun because you think you're under attack, or you think somebody's going to get revenge on something for something you did. Call the police. I don't want that gun in your pocket, because when you take it out and shoot, you're no marksman, buddy. You have innocent kids walking across the street who get killed, a school teacher who can get killed. These people have gotten killed. I don't want anybody to have illegal guns on them unless you have a gun permit. You're going to go to jail just for that. And God forbid you use it. You're going to get launched, because the 6 judges I'm going to put in that division are going to say one thing: so long.
Thank you, Mr. Peruto. Mr. Vega.
First thing I would do is attack and address the issue of violence in our communities of color. And I would bring in what's called the Focused Deterrence Program. That is a program that Mr. Krasner eliminated when he took office. That program, which was created by a Harvard study, addressed the issues of the violence being perpetrated by a select few ravaging certain neighborhoods. In that program, you get law enforcement involved, and I mean all law enforcement, federal, state, and local, along with community leaders and business leaders, where they go to the people who are perpetrating the violence and telling them, we put the guns down and we'll give you an alternative, which is counseling, job opportunities, at which point they themselves reduce the violence and their accountability. If they get rid of the violence, they get those opportunities. If they don't, you prosecute them fully. Secondly, I would put the office and make it transparent once again, making the victims and witnesses part of the process, knowing what is going on every step of the way. And finally, which is much needed, is the training of the prosecutors. I believe, talking to the defense bar and judges in general, the quality of lawyering in the DA's office has gone down substantially, in that we are the lawyers for the Commonwealth. We are lawyers for the victims, and the quality, and they deserve with their tax dollars to have the best legal representation. So those are the three things we want: focus deterrence, reduce the crime, make the victims part of the process, that they know what's going on. And finally, address the issue of the competence of the lawyers. The lawyers have to be competent. Our citizens deserve the best lawyers in the system. And finally, one issue, which is I'm taking it around, is something that really is outrageous. If you talk about Anthony Wright, if you look at the legal documents, and I'm sure there are lawyers looking at this, look at the disciplinary action and the lawsuit. My name is not mentioned at all, because that was not my case. I was brought in to question several witnesses and left. I was there only 2 weeks. I was not in any of the litigation, not my case. But it's important, once again, the quality of lawyering and taking care of our victims. That is what's needed. We have to reduce the violence, because it's our people of color that are dying in record numbers. The people of color are our future, and get the DA's office to be representative of the color of this city. Okay, we have African Americans and Latinos that need to be a voice and need to be seen and need to be heard.
Thank you, Mr. Vega. DA Krasner.
I'm a little stunned by hearing Mr. Vega say he wasn't involved in the litigation of the Tony Wright case. He was co-counsel. He put on 2 detectives who coerced a confession from a man who didn't even see the crime, much less commit it. He was deposed at length in all the lawsuits, and $10 million of tax money went to that lawsuit, a good portion of it because of the outrage of there even being a second trial. Those are the facts. So let us move on to what we would do. I've already talked about what has now essentially become the Black clergy's plan to deal with violence prevention. It's the raising of $100 million, an idea that came from a community organization, dovetails with success that occurred in Los Angeles, also Chicago, in terms of long-term serious reductions in that. But here's the big picture. The big picture is, we all know that in a city that's 7-1 Democratic, the primary is the main chance. And we also know this. I've just completed a forum with 2 gentlemen. One is a Republican and the other says he is a Democrat, but he is being endorsed by the leadership of the FOP, who are asking Republicans to change their registration to Democrat. They are trying to make fake Democrats to support a supposedly Democratic candidate who's endorsed by the same people who endorsed Donald J. Trump twice and have now endorsed Mr. Vega. We need to get real about this. There's one Democrat who is in this race. There is a fake Democrat, and then there is a Republican. We are either going to choose the future. We're going to look at promises that were made, promises that were kept, and the trust that goes with the fact that you keep it, even if you stumble, even if you make mistakes. And yes, I make mistakes every day. And no, I'm not suggesting for a minute that every single one of our policies is perfect. That's why we collect the data to try to fix it. But we have a choice, and the Rizzo statue is gone. I respectfully suggest that it is time for us to choose the future.
Thank you, DA Krasner. And I want to thank, on behalf of the Bar Association and on behalf of Chancellor Lauren McKenna, I want to thank DA Krasner, Mr. Vega, Mr. Peruto. I want to thank the nearly 1,000 people in the audience that have been listening, for taking the time to show up today and to hear this. We hope we've communicated and conveyed information to you. As I stated before, there were questionnaires that were filled out by the candidates, and you were emailed those questionnaires today, and you will be able to find them on the website when we post this recording. Again, on behalf of the Bar Association and Chancellor McKenna, thank you so much, and that concludes our program. Have a good night.